She had built a $900 million empire by never being impressed by anything. Until she saw an engine that shouldn't exist. Florence Shaw, CEO, Millionaire, the most powerful woman in every room she'd ever walked into, stood on that factory floor and asked one question: who designed this? Nobody answered fast enough, and then a little girl in a too large worker's vest, holding a juice box, looked up with a gap-toothed smile, and pointed at her daddy. A man in a technician's uniform. Grease on his hands. A name stitched on his chest that nobody had bothered to read closely for 4 years. A mechanical engineering degree. A mind that could redesign what an entire team of engineers couldn't solve. And a reason he'd stayed silent all this time, a reason with 2 pigtails and red elastic bands who called him daddy. Florence Shaw had never frozen in her life. She froze. This is the story of what happens when the right person finally gets asked the right question, and a little girl who never stopped believing he would be. Welcome to Kindness Arena. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and unseen connections that change lives, please help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. Help me show her that stories like this matter and deserve to be heard by hitting the subscribe button, liking the video, comment your thoughts, where you are watching from, and share it with someone who needs it to stay motivated. Your support keeps these powerful true stories alive. The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Shaw Industries smelled like ambition, polished mahogany, fresh espresso, and the quiet electricity of money. Florence Shaw sat at the head of the long glass table, her posture impeccable, her dark blazer pressed without a single crease, her eyes scanning the quarterly projections the way a hawk scans open fields. She was 41 years old. She had built her automotive empire from a single repair shop inherited from her late father, and in 18 years, she had turned it into one of the most formidable vehicle manufacturing conglomerates in the country. The numbers are strong, said her CFO, Derek Mills, adjusting his glasses and gesturing toward the holographic display. Revenue is up 14%. The new SUV line is outperforming projections by. I heard you for the first time, Derek. Florence's voice was calm, measured. The kind of calm that made grown men straighten their ties. She closed the leather folder in front of her and stood. Schedule the factory floor inspection for tomorrow morning. I want to see the new engine assembly line myself. Not through a presentation, not through numbers, but in person. Derek blinked. Tomorrow? But the investor dinner, reschedule it. She was already walking toward the door. The next morning, Florence arrived at the Greystone manufacturing plant at 7:15. The plant was a cathedral of industry, towering ceilings, fluorescent lights humming overhead, the rhythmic clank and hiss of machinery filling the air like a symphony composed in steel. Workers in blue overalls moved with purpose. Forklifts hummed along painted yellow pathways. The smell of machine oil and hot metal hung in the air like incense. Florence walked with her operations director, Harold Sims, who was sweating slightly despite the air conditioning. The new V8 engine assembly begins on line C, Harold said, nearly jogging to keep pace with her long, deliberate strides. We moved into full production 3 weeks ago. The team is. Harold. Florence stopped abruptly. They were passing line B when she saw it. A disassembled engine laid out on a work table, not just any engine, but one she had never seen in any blueprint, any report, any specification document she had reviewed. It was the prototype V8, yes, but something had been done to it. The thermal management brackets had been redesigned. The intake manifold sat at a different angle. The cooling channels visible through the transparent casing model next to it traced paths she had never approved. It was elegant, disturbingly elegant. Florence walked slowly toward the table, her eyes narrowing. She reached out and ran 2 fingers along the edge of the redesigned manifold casing. This isn't what was in the approved design file, she said quietly. Harold cleared his throat. No, The original design was running too hot under sustained load. One of our technicians modified the thermal layout during the prototype testing phase. It solved the heat dissipation problem completely. The engineers confirmed it. The modification reduced operating temperature by 11 degrees Celsius and improved fuel efficiency by 4%. Quality control approved it last month. Florence didn't respond immediately. She circled the engine the way a jeweler circles a diamond of suspicious quality, not doubting its value, but deeply curious about its origin. 4%, she repeated softly. Yes, She straightened and looked at Harold with those dark, searching eyes of hers. Who designed this? Harold opened his mouth, then paused. He looked around the floor. The modification came from the Line C team. I'd have to check the documentation to give you the exact. Find out. Now. Her tone left no room for delay. Harold scurried off with his radio, and Florence turned back to the engine, her arms folded, her mind already pulling the design apart and reassembling it in her head. Whoever had done this understood not just the mechanics but the philosophy of thermal dynamics. This wasn't a patch job. This was a beautiful, understated, quietly brilliant solution. 10 minutes later, Harold returned. "I found the technician," he said, slightly breathless. "He's on break. His daughter is here today, it's take your child to work day. I can have him come over, but..." "His daughter?" Florence raised an eyebrow. "Yes? It's..." Harold checked his watch. "We allow it once a year. Some of the workers bring their kids in the morning. She's been sitting quietly in the break area. He's a good worker. Very quiet man. Keeps to himself mostly." "I can bring him," Florence said simply. 2 minutes passed. Florence stood with her back to the corridor, studying the engine drawings on the nearby tablet, scrolling through the modification specs with growing intensity. She heard footsteps approaching, 2 sets. One heavy and measured. One small and quick, the soft patter of a child's sneakers on concrete. She turned and she froze. Standing 10 feet away was a little girl of no more than 6 years old, round-cheeked and bright-eyed, wearing a yellow dress under a miniature blue worker's vest that was clearly 3 sizes too large for her. She had 2 pigtails held with red elastic bands and a gap between her front teeth that made her small smile look like sunshine through a cracked door. She held a juice box in one hand and looked at Florence with the unfiltered curiosity that only small children possess, the kind of stare that doesn't know it's rude because it hasn't yet learned pretense. Behind her stood her father. He was tall, taller than Florence had expected, with broad, quiet shoulders and the kind of hands that told stories. Large, calloused hands, stained faintly with machine oil that no amount of scrubbing would fully erase. He wore the standard blue technician's coveralls, his name stitched in white above the left breast pocket. P. Jones. His face was angular and serious, with dark eyes that carried in them something Florence recognized immediately. Not sadness exactly, but the particular stillness of a man who had survived something that had permanently rearranged the furniture of his soul. He looked to be in his late 30s. His jaw held a 2-day shadow. His posture was straight but not stiff, the posture of a man who was physically present and emotionally somewhere else entirely. He looked at Florence the way a man of his position was supposed to look at a woman of hers, with quiet respect and careful distance. But there was no nervousness in his eyes, no scrambling, just steadiness. Florence realized she hadn't spoken. She also realized she had been staring. She cleared her throat. "I'm told you made the modifications to the V8 thermal management system." The man, Peter, she now registered, from the name on his chest, gave a single, measured nod. "Yes, His voice was deep and unhurried. The kind of voice that didn't audition for attention. "Walk me through it," Florence said. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Peter's expression, not surprise. More like a man who had been waiting a long time for someone to ask him that question. He stepped forward, and the little girl trotted obediently alongside him, clutching her juice box. The original bracket configuration was routing exhaust heat back toward the intake side, Peter began, reaching past Florence to point at the manifold. He smelled faintly of machine oil and something clean, like laundry soap. Under standard driving conditions, it wasn't an issue. But sustained load, highway towing, long incline climbs and the heat buildup was compounding. The system was fighting itself. Florence watched his hands as he spoke, pointing and tracing with the precision of someone who didn't need diagrams because the diagrams already lived inside his mind. "I repositioned the thermal brackets here and here," he continued, indicating 2 points on the casing, rerouted the cooling channels to run parallel to the exhaust flow instead of perpendicular, and adjusted the manifold angle by 7 degrees. It lets the heat dissipate forward and away instead of cycling back. He paused. "It's not complicated. It's just geometry." Just geometry. Florence's jaw tightened slightly. It was not just geometry, it was exactly the kind of thinking that her lead engineering team, men and women with advanced degrees and generous salaries, had failed to produce for 6 months. She turned to look at him fully. "Where did you train?" Peter held her gaze. "Mechanical engineering. State University. Class of 2009. Florence blinked. "You have a degree in mechanical engineering?" "Yes, The silence between them held its breath. Florence looked down at his coveralls, at the technician designation on his badge. A mechanical engineer working as a floor technician. In her plant. For how long? She glanced at Harold, who was studying the floor tiles with great intensity. How long have you been a technician here? She asked, looking back at Peter. 4 years, he said. Then, as if answering the question beneath the question, the real one, the why, he glanced down at the little girl beside him. The little girl chose that exact moment to look up at Florence with her enormous, uncomplicated eyes and smile, the gap-toothed smile. That's my daddy, she announced proudly, pointing up at Peter with her juice box. He knows everything about engines. Florence looked at the child. Then at Peter. Then at the child again. What's your name? She asked softly. Kira, the little girl said, swinging her juice box slightly. I'm 6. My daddy brought me to see the big machines. He said one day people will know his name. She nodded with the absolute conviction of someone who has never once doubted the person she loves most. I already know it. Something happened in Florence Shaw's chest then, something quiet and tectonic, the way shifts happen underground before anyone feels them on the surface. She had stood in front of presidents, negotiated with billionaires, walked away from deals that would have made lesser people weep. She had not flinched once in 18 years of building an empire. But a 6-year-old girl in a too large vest had just cracked something open in her. Florence looked at Peter again. 4 years, she repeated, quietly, almost to herself. He met her eyes, he didn't explain himself, he didn't apologize for the trajectory of his life. He simply stood there steady, unhurried, patient in the way of a man who had made peace with his choices, even the ones made in the wreckage of loss. Later, Florence would ask Harold for Peter's full file. She would read it in her office with the city glittering 42 floors below her. She would learn that his wife, Anna, had died 4 years ago from a sudden illness, 6 weeks after Kira was born. She would read that Peter had been halfway through his first year at a prominent automotive engineering firm when Anna got sick. That he had left the firm, not been let go, left voluntarily. That he had applied at Greystone because it was 8 minutes from Kira's daycare. He had listed his engineering degree in his application and been placed in a technician role because there were no engineering positions open at the time, and he had said, this was the line that stopped Florence cold, any position is fine. I just need to be close to home. He had stayed a technician for 4 years because no one had ever looked closely enough to see what was underneath the overalls. Florence didn't say all of this at that moment on the factory floor, of course. At that moment, she simply looked at Peter Jones for a long breath and said, I'd like you in my engineering office on Monday. 8 a.m. Peter's expression didn't explode into gratitude or relief the way she might have expected. He absorbed the words the way he absorbed everything, quietly, fully. I'd need to arrange care for Kira, he said. I'll have HR arrange whatever is needed. Florence looked at him steadily. Monday. 8 a.m. He nodded once. Yes, Florence turned to walk away. Then she stopped and turned back. She crouched down to Kira's level, Florence Shaw, CEO of a $900 million company, crouching on a factory floor in a blazer that cost more than most people's rent, and looked at the little girl in her serious, bright eyes. You're right, she said softly. People are going to know his name. Kira beamed so wide it could have lit the whole floor. On Monday morning, Peter Jones walked into the Shaw Industries engineering suite for the first time. He wore a button-down shirt and carried a notebook, actual paper, spiral-bound, filled edge to edge with diagrams and calculations in a handwriting so small and precise it looked like blueprints. Florence met him at the door personally, which made every engineer in the room sit up a little straighter. She extended her hand. He shook it, a firm, unhurried grip. Welcome to the engineering team, Mr. Jones, she said. He looked around the room at the whiteboards and the screens and the models and the 12 engineers watching him, and something in those quiet dark eyes finally moved. Thank you, he said simply. 18 months later, the Shaw Industries V8 Pro Series engine, designed principally by Peter Jones, would win the International Automotive Engineering Innovation Award. It would be featured on the cover of Machine and Motor Quarterly, described as a masterclass in thermal efficiency and elegant mechanical thinking. At the award ceremony, Florence would stand at the podium and say, to a room of 500 industry leaders, the best engineers don't always live in the offices we've built for them. Sometimes they're on the factory floor, waiting patiently. Waiting for someone to ask the right question. In the front row, a little girl in a red dress sat with her gap-toothed smile pointed like a beacon at her father, who sat beside her in a new suit that fit him exactly right, the suit of a man who had finally been given the room he'd always deserved. Kira tugged his sleeve. I told you, Daddy, she whispered. Peter looked down at his daughter, this small, ferocious, unwavering person who had been his whole world for 4 years, and for the first time since Anna died, he laughed. Really laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep, somewhere that has been sealed and dark and waiting for light. Yeah, baby girl, he said, pulling her close. You told me. And somewhere in the audience, Florence Shaw watched them, father and daughter, grief and grace, talent finally finding its room, and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It felt, she thought, remarkably like hope. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness is never wasted and that even a broken path can lead to beautiful places and change of lives, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Kindness Arena because your support keeps stories like this alive and spreading. Tell us in the comment what you would have done differently if you were the Millionaire CEO. Would you have promoted him to engineer if not for the invention? Or has a stranger's kindness ever changed your life in ways you didn't expect? Would love to hear your story.